Hello and welcome to HUDL Up, the podcast from HUDL where we're holding space for real stories, shared power and collective change. HUDL works alongside young people, organisations and communities to create fairer systems and better opportunities, not just for young people but with them. And this podcast is where those stories come to life. Each episode we'll hear from young leaders, practitioners and partners who are reshaping how decisions are made and programmes are designed. Together, we'll explore what it takes to build equitable partnerships, share power meaningfully, and create change that lasts. We believe that when young people are involved at every stage, from design and decision-making to delivery, systems become fairer and communities become stronger. So let's huddle up and get started with today's episode. And our guests for today's episode are Catherine Hillis, Director of A Fairer Future at Esmée Fairbairn, and Kimberly Garande, a former member of the IYPC collective, and Ines Hart, a current member of the IYPC collective. So, to start us off, Catherine, could you tell our listeners what is the Involving Young People's Collective, the partnership between Esmée and the collective? How did it develop?
Okay, yeah. Now, so we're going to go back in time a little bit. It's my pleasure to try and remember this. So I've been involved since the start, before the Involving Young People Collective was called that, indeed. So the whole idea of this came towards the end of 2019. At Esmée, we'd been having some conversations about how we might involve young people. And that was because with our children and young people's funding, we're always asked organisations for them to involve young people. And we prioritised organisations that had really good systems for involving young people, involving them in decision-making and governance, using young people's lived experience to shape policy work and influencing. So it's something that we really believed in, but we'd never done it ourselves. And then increasingly, we were taking a lot of inspiration from organisations that were being very, very innovative about youth leadership and youth governance and changing systems. And then we've been involved in a couple of joint funder partnerships, Act for Change Fund with Paul Hamlin Foundation and I Will. And we've involved young people on the panel for the decision making there. And then we're involved with the Listening Fund, led by Blagrave, and with a number of other youth sector funders involved. And we thought, let's give this a go, let's try it. But we were really keen that we didn't want it to be tokenistic, because we're a funder, we're not working directly with young people ourselves. The skill set, we were funding managers and people used to moving money rather than necessarily people who work directly with young people themselves. And we didn't want to do it wrong. We didn't want to mess it up. So we put out an invitation to tender to ask an organisation to recruit a group of young people and to co-design the process, to think what it might mean for a funder like Esmée to involve young people and to do it well and not in a tokenistic way. So we put that tender out at the end of 2019. We're delighted, Keji, when you and HUDL responded. We awarded you guys the contract. And that was really the beginning of the whole co-design process. So over the next 6 months, the whole notion and the name of the Involving Young People Collective began. But it was a crazy ride, because also, as you can imagine, we just started recruiting the young people in March 2020, and then something else happened.
And we all know what happened in March 2020.
Pandemic, yeah. So yeah, it was a crazy time, but I think it was really interesting, because we imagined we'd do it in person and we ended up doing it all online. But that did actually, I think, drive the process a little bit as well. In this crazy time when none of us knew what Zoom was and how to work like that, but that's what we did.
Yeah, and now it's become the hybrid model that we have now, right? So thank you so much for explaining that and framing it, Catherine. So I want to bring in Ines and Kim. Hi, guys. And I want to kick off with the first question, which is, when did you get involved with the collective and what made you want to get involved?
I'm happy to kick off. So it's Kimberly, and I joined the collective in October 2021, which feels like a lifetime ago, but I was still, I would say, relatively new in the charity space in my role. And I think the reason I joined was because I hadn't come across any opportunities like this before, that were seeking young people's expertise, but also paying them. I was curious to understand how decisions are made, because at the time I was working for a youth-led charity and wanting to understand, who makes the decisions about where we get funding from, and just that curiosity to understand how funding decisions are made and to have an input based on my lived experience. I thought that was really interesting. I didn't know what lived experience meant, but obviously I had lived experience at the time. And the opportunity just seemed really cool. It was something different. People seemed approachable. So I remember turning up to an online session to hear more about it. And I just liked the energy. It seemed like a nice group of people, even though I didn't know them. And I think having spoken to some of the people that had been in the cohort the first time round and hearing their experiences and them just speaking casually, it felt organic, it felt natural, it didn't feel like an intimidating space. So I think that's why I joined, out of curiosity, but also because it was something that I hadn't seen being done before in the sector.
Amazing. Thank you, Kim. Ines, how about you? When did you get involved and what made you get involved?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ines. I joined in 2023, so 2 years after Kim. I think by that point it had been a bit more established as the collective. So I think I came in with that vantage point of a lot of the resources and even the job advert was very clear as to sort of what the job role was, in the sense that it was going to be remote, online. But what wasn't maybe so clear, and I think this is intentional, is just the fact that it's in grant making and you have to have an interest in community justice or social justice. And I thought, as Kim just said, the curiosity was sparked because I had no previous experience in grant making. However, my experience was more so in kind of climate advocacy, looking into that kind of migrant and gender justice lens as well. And so that was where I was coming from with this. I saw that advert on LinkedIn, of all places, just as I was scrolling, and just those values really screamed at me when I read the advert. And I think for me, as Kim said, it was the first time I'd seen an opportunity that was actually paid, because all my other advocacy was all done on a voluntary basis, and I'd done a lot of consulting also on a non-paid basis. So I was curious to see what that would be like, what that relationship would be like when you have that kind of monetary value added. And of course, I was really pleasantly surprised. I think for me, all I knew was that it felt like a good opportunity to learn. And the fact that it's a cohort structure really enticed me as well, because I think it can be quite a lonely space, advocacy. So being able to have that community of people and being able to meet in person on certain occasions was actually something that really drew me to apply for the collective. And I'm so glad I did.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So that's really interesting to kind of hear how you all sort of came into this partnership. And Catherine, how you and I went from having an initial phone call and thinking about what this might look like. And something that you said in your intro, Catherine, was around like avoiding tokenism. So a question that I want to kind of ask all of you is, why does this work? Why does it matter? Why do we need to go beyond things being like nice to have? And what do you feel is at stake if organizations don't do that well?
I think what's really at stake if organizations focus on what's nice to have and kind of the optics is that you break down trust with young people. I think what made this opportunity really powerful at the IYPC was that Esmée had a genuine interest in changing, in learning and adapting. We weren't just fitting an already made process. There was room to grow and recommend and go through that learning journey together. And I think that's what made it really special, and I think really valuable, and also made not just myself but others that I spoke to feel valued in the process beyond the monetary stuff. The reason why we all stayed, I mean, I was there for an extra year because I genuinely didn't want to leave. It was one of the very few spaces that I felt empowered in. I think that's down to the organization of it and the intentional design in bringing young people in to test and observe and further kind of grant making practices, but in a way that wasn't a case of Esmée had the answer already. We were working on the answer together. And I think when I initially joined, there were three, if you can remind me, Keji, three different groups, development subgroup. There was a communication subgroup,
And it was the grant making.
and a grant making subgroup. And what was great was that Esmée had done that initial work in looking at the spaces within the organization that they wanted to develop further. And having that clarity for us coming in was really helpful, because you could see where your input was making a difference directly. And I think that was due to the intentional way of doing that, but also obviously partnering with HUDL and supporting us in answering some of those big questions together. Because I think when you do this work as a nice to have, the risk is that young people will feel undervalued and feel like they're just there in name only. Whereas we saw a lot of the work that we did turn into, additional criteria. For example, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but the introduction of joy and care into criteria wasn't there before, and then it was introduced, and being able to see those tangible differences be as a result of your influence as a collective was really powerful, and that was really appreciated.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
That's really interesting. If I could just jump in, Keji, because something that Kim said there really reminded me of something that I'd forgotten about at the start. And I think it was an early conversation you and I had, Keji, because I think Esmée, we were a bit nervous about getting it wrong. We didn't want it to be tokenistic, but also we didn't want it to get it wrong. We knew that we wanted it to be a positive experience for young people who were working with Esmée. And we also knew that we wanted, I guess, to create the best impact that we could. But one of the things that was really freeing from an early conversation was this idea of test and learn, this idea that we didn't have to get it right first time. And there were a number of reasons that enabled us to do that. And it's position of privilege as well, because Esmée is an endowed foundation. So we had the resource to not see this as a sort of short-term project. We were like, well, let's take our time. And also let's have the resource to be able to pay people properly to do this work. But we just set off with the kind of like, well, let's try some things and let's see it all with a kind of learning hat on. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong, but then let's reflect on why it went wrong and think about what we could do better. And so we set off on the whole journey, I think, without a particular goal in mind. Well, the goal was, how can we best involve young people in Esmée's work? But we didn't have a blueprint for that. And we were totally up for testing some things along the way. I remember coming into it a little bit, my mindset was, because I was the lead for Children and Young People's funding at the time, my mindset was a little bit, well, let's get young people involved in decision-making about funding. And then I remember one of the first sessions with IYPC and people saying, well, we want to talk to your director of investment about how you invest your endowment. I'm like, okay, brilliant, great. Let's pull back and let's open our minds to where the opportunities might be here, and let's try some stuff. And if it doesn't work, we can chalk it up to experience. We can take the learning, we can try and share that and be open and transparent about it, and let's try some other stuff. And so we went into it in that way. We refined, we changed things. And I kind of think that's how, that whole model that Kim just described of the different groups and the ways of working on different things, that's where that kind of all flowed from, was let's try and look at everything Esmée does and think about where the best opportunities are.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't prescribed. I think when we went in, when we first started, the thing that we focused on was having the conversations and scoping the lay of the land, right, at Esmée, and really thinking about where do young people most want to impact the work, where can they impact the work, and also equally where do staff kind of see young people being able to support the work that they're doing and to take that work further. And then over the 5 years, it's just kind of evolved into a range of different things. So thank you both for sharing that. So Catherine, back to you. A question that I wanted to ask is, I think it's always been very clear from the beginning that you have championed this work and you've championed bringing young people into the world of Esmée and really having young people embedded across Esmée Fairbairn. So I think it's interesting to ask you then, prior to sort of the tender going out and you commissioning HUDL, were there any internal barriers or hesitation that you kind of came up against that you could share with us?
Well, I have to say, absolute props to Caroline, our CEO, and to Sharon Shea, Director of Funding at the time when I kind of suggested this, that they were totally up for trying it and giving it a go. We also had benefited from Phil Kerry, who's now the CEO of New Horizon Youth Centre, who'd come in as part of a shadowing thing and had some conversations with us about how we might involve young people. So I guess we'd done a little bit of thinking. We'd learned a lot from our funded partners, from their work. So I think there was quite a lot of support internally, actually, just to try something. We started off kind of parametering it for like 6 months. Let's, give it a go.
Yeah.
And then basically we've just kind of rolled from there. It hasn't all been plain sailing. We've definitely got things wrong. We've learned as we've gone. There are some things that are easier to do than others. When I think about some of the things that maybe IYPC colleagues and Esmée colleagues would say have gone the best, they're probably the things that are more sort of project-based or more kind of contained. So things like the Involving Young People's Fund, Youth-Led Creativity that Kim just mentioned, where we changed the criteria, Blue Spaces. These are kind of confined projects. And I think it's been easier for us to do that work than it has been to do work about our ongoing structures and processes, just because it's more complicated, I guess, to involve people in that.
But it's
And
not
I think
necessarily out of reach, right? But it's just
no,
taken much longer to
it's taken
work it
longer.
out.
Exactly. And I think when something is kind of parametered and boundaried, then it's easier to see, there's a beginning, a middle and end. You can kind of plot how IYPC colleagues can work in that. I think things that are more open-ended, they are more difficult. You've got a broader range of stakeholders. So I think that's definitely something where we've learned more about along the way. I mean, I think there's been a real commitment across Esmée, but also I suppose one of the things that we did discuss quite a lot at the start was the fact that if we involve young people, should we also be involving different cohorts of different people with different lived experience that meet the other areas of Esmée's strategy? Because Esmée's quite a broad funder. We're not just a youth funder. It's perhaps easier if you're just a youth funder to think about youth engagement. But actually that's also opens up a really rich and interesting conversation, because we have made sure that we're reaching out to organisations that work across the different areas of Esmée's strategy. We're reaching out to organisations that work in the arts or work in environment, or, so that we bring a real range of lived and learned experience across IYPC colleagues in. And I think that's really helped us think about it in a kind of a much broader way.
Ines, Kim, is there anything that you want to add to what Catherine said?
I think I can completely agree with that. But I think what I really valued in being in the IYPC was that there were moments of tension, but I think they were approached carefully. And I think conversations didn't feel stifling, sometimes where you don't feel listened to as a young person. And I always sometimes attribute that to the role of HUDL being like an intermediary and holding the space and providing that pastoral support outside of our interactions with Esmée staff as well, because it's not every day and we are consultants. And so not being like a full-time member of staff or a part-time member of staff that's embedded in the organisation can sometimes be difficult to see, like you were saying, Catherine, some of that long-term stuff, because you're not involved in it in the beginning. So that helped to bridge that gap. But I do think, give yourselves credit, because I mean we've all had an incredible experience, and it's led to future opportunities that I think has shaped a lot of us. And I don't know if you agree, Ines, but I certainly feel like had I not taken up this role, I don't know if I would be working in grant making.
I actually wanted to ask you both, so Ines and Kim, I wanted to ask you, as you know, Catherine is one of our lead champions, main champions, OG champions, if you want to call it, within Esmée Fairbairn. Do you feel like that it's important to have someone in the organisation who is genuinely championing this work and genuinely championing bringing young people like into the space, basically?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. It's so interesting, Catherine, you're talking about how project-based work is maybe a bit easier to involve young people, and that's exactly where I was going. My perspective was with this question, because I had an amazing experience with a great champion within our Blue Spaces project. So one of our grant managers, Jenny Wilden, she was such a powerhouse within that work and really embedded us as youth consultants from the beginning within the work. And for me, it brought such light to the experience. But I think it's interesting to come at it from a point of view of when you step back, I think it's just values of respect and providing a space to be listened to as young people, and to sort of tailor that environment for young people's needs. And that's kind of it. Like, I think when people think of how do we involve young people, it becomes a really scary prospect, and you feel like you need so much extra knowledge and so much extra training. And I think it does force you to think differently. You do have to think of how you safeguard spaces and the safety of young people and the people in the room. But that kind of should be a given here. I think having young people in spaces kind of forces organizations who haven't thought of it already, it forces them to put in those processes and mechanisms that should already be there in the first place, or just adjust them, really. So I think for me, the takeaway is having someone internally who champions you is just someone who is able to value you and respect you as a person to begin with. And I think that's it. It really manifested. It was so positive. Everyone had such positive feedback to the project work that we were doing. And it was really seen as an example of how to work with young people. But at the end of the day, when I reflected, it was just the simple values of respect, holding space for our opinions, and just really having that genuine interaction there. But for me, I guess to finish, it's just having someone on the inside who can champion you. It means that you're more comfortable to be that critical friend and to challenge and to really have those difficult conversations. So the bottom line is, when you create that environment for young people to be themselves, to be genuine, it enables for those challenging questions and conversations to really pull through, which is really valuable in this work.
I completely agree with that. I think having the buy-in from senior members of staff in an organisation makes a big difference in how the project itself is seen. It's not a bolt-on or, a temporary nice to have. It's a commitment. And I think having the likes of Catherine and other funding managers, but I think specifically having you, Catherine, really champion us to the trustees, to the CEO, as a senior member of staff really does make a difference, especially where sometimes things can be tough in the climate of, charity, but also the world in general. And so it can be hard to prioritize things, but I think you always ensured that the work that we did and the commitment you made to partner with HUDL, to work with the collective, was a priority throughout. And I think that's been really evident over the last 5 years, that it stayed at the top of the agenda as opposed to something that's quick to be dropped off because of external circumstances.
Thank you. So I want to move us along a little bit. So, Kim, I mentioned that you are a former member of the collective and you recently left us. I know, sad times, last July, but you're still connected. And I wanted to just speak to, I guess, some of the opportunities that you've had and how that's kind of impacting you now. So, Catherine, the first question I want to ask is, you, if you recall, invited Kim to a meeting that ended up opening up a job opportunity. What made you, I guess, how did that come about? And then, Kim, if you want to sort of jump in terms of what has been, how did you find that experience and where are you at now?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it wasn't sort of intentional, was it, Kim? It all kind of just sort of flowed. It was, I mean, I'll speak to the specific and then I'll say something general about this because I think it's a really interesting learning for Esmée. So that was just one of those things where Caroline, our CEO, had been talking to CEO of another foundation, said, "Oh yeah, we've got the Involving Young People Collective. Talk to Catherine about it." And I said, "Oh yeah, no, really happy to talk to you and your colleagues about it, but let me bring her along, one of the IYPC so that you can hear from an IYPC consultant how that experience has been for them." And so it was just sort of genuinely wanting to share, amongst funding peers, kind of how we worked. And so we just went into that conversation, Kim, I think just to share a little bit about the journey of the IYPC and how that had been for Esmée. And then it opens up this whole other conversation. So I'll let Kim talk about that. But I think it does reflect on a point that I've thought of quite a bit since is that when we started the IYPC, we were thinking really quite selfishly from Esmee's point of view. We're like, how can we get ideas and input and insight into what we're doing so that we can be a better funder, that we can have greater impact in our funding? And, and we will pay people for their time to contribute to that. And I suppose what we hadn't really thought about so much was how we might actually ourselves open up pathways and routes and ways for IYPC colleagues to find out more about our work and to connect to the organisations that we work with. And what's ended up is this quite interesting thing that we quite often, young people who get involved in IYPC have come up through organisations known to Esmée. Perhaps we fund them or we partner with them. They've come up through programs, then they get involved with IYPC. And then quite a number of IYPC colleagues have gone on to work at peer funders or kind of get involved in the sector in other ways. And I hadn't really thought about that. And then it makes a lot of sense. Like, why wouldn't we make ourselves more porous? Why wouldn't we kind of try and use our position, our opportunities to make sure that, brilliant colleagues can benefit from that? But yeah, Kim, I really remember that meeting. It was brilliant because you just shone in the meeting, and obviously then, they wanted to give you a job. Amazing.
Oh, I'm surprised that I shone, because I think I was in a cafe somewhere in Hackney. I was in transit, but I think I was just really excited to share what we were doing. So I felt like it was really forward thinking and a really cool experience. I'd talk about it to my friends outside of the sector, like at home, and they all said, "Oh, this is really cool. How did you get involved in that?" So to know that another organisation was interested in just finding out a bit more about us was just really nice. And I think when we had that conversation, it was with the Westminster Foundation. So their impact and evaluation manager and a young person that they'd been working with on building their youth voice work and their strategy at the time just were curious to understand our approach and what worked and perhaps some of the challenges. And it was really a really casual conversation, informal. It felt really warm. And I think you offered me space, Catherine, to actually just share, as a colleague. I think it's something that I've taken away out of that experience, particularly when now I engage in any conversations with young people that I'm working with, is that I give them the space as well as a colleague to speak, which prior to being in the IYPC, I'd always kind of seen things the other way around. Like the young person gets brought in to maybe share their experience for like 2 minutes, and the rest of the conversation is the adults talking. Whereas this felt really, really collaborative at the beginning in sharing what was working and insights. And not too long after that, I think they were really impressed by our model that the Westminster Foundation asked for a chat. And I went to speak more about just one of my ambitions, but also the things that I was learning. And I had engaged with the young person that they were working with after that meeting offline. And we just really got on in terms of our values, what we cared about. And it was another young person like me. And I think that made a difference in that there was that representation there. It wasn't, an alien organization coming in and people not really understanding who I am. I didn't feel like I needed to speak formally or in a particular way in order to be understood. It was really relational. And I think that's what made me actually take up the opportunity, because they also had somebody who was in my position, but wanting to learn more, and someone who believed that actually from what they'd heard and listening to how we work together in terms of Esmée and the IYPC, they wanted that for themselves. And I thought, yeah, why not? I'll give it a go. And I'm now there for 2 years. And it's been really great because your advocacy for me, Catherine, and just believing in my input and the value that I bring or brought to the IYPC gave me that confidence. And it's something that I've been able to transfer to other young people in this space. And I think it's also the extra time that you offered, where, when I was looking for jobs at the time, and even the offer to look at my CV, it's things that take time outside of your ordinary hours, but that meant a lot, because it meant you cared and you actually believed in me. And I think, yeah, I owe you a great one for your instilling of that confidence, because
I'm gonna cry.
honestly. And so I've always wanted to be a Catherine somewhere else, and I think I've carried that on, and be a Keji somewhere else as well. But I think that's thanks to how you work with us as colleagues, as peers, rather than young people you're facilitating. Don't know if that makes sense, but
It actually leads to the question I want to ask, which is, what does this say about what becomes possible when young people are genuinely seen as peers, as colleagues, and not as participants? And that's open to anyone.
It was so lovely to hear that, Kim. So thank you. And I'd just like to say that I've learned so much from working with the IYPC about this whole thing about being collaborative and just kind of everyone just sort of vibing of each other and learning and sort of coming quite genuinely into a space and thinking, what have I got to offer, but also what have I got to learn, and the kind of listening and the speaking. And I feel, and hats off to HUDL, because I think you've really helped create that space where it does feel like it is a genuine exchange. And one of the things that it's really made me think about is intergenerational working, because we're all standing on the shoulders of people who've gone before that we've learned from and we've taken, knowledge and ideas from. And then how can we sort of be almost kind of, conduits to that? Like, we learn from people previously, but we open up, opportunities to have that exchange with people who are coming up, who are younger as well. And that feels to me like a really important part of and what we need in times like this, right? We need different ideas and exchange and sort of intergenerational connection. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that I've taken from my learning from IYPC colleagues and from HUDL colleagues.
I was going to jump on that point with intergenerational exchange, because that's definitely something at the collective currently we are exploring a lot when we're thinking about terms such as youth-led, and what does youth-led mean, and actually does it mean that you have those internal champions who have been there before, and actually is it a case of being able to build on those relationships together to be able to actually co-produce and work collectively on those goals. And I definitely think that that's something that the collective and Esmée have been able to do. But I do agree with Kim that actually having the presence of HUDL as that kind of third party in the middle has been useful at times, because I think that actually helps to HUDL understands how we as IYPC think and our ideas, and are kind of entrenched in that process. So I think sometimes, because we're not full time, it helps to have someone in the middle who's able to pull on those threads and those themes and maybe package it up in a way for some Esmée colleagues to be able to digest it in a way that they understand and they can see where we're coming from. So they really see HUDL as a great intermediary between our ideas and Esmée, but I think it just helps to solidify that relationship a bit more. So when we come into spaces, we don't always need HUDL there, because we are speaking that same language, because we've been able to have that person in the middle who's been able to facilitate those conversations at points potentially, because as I say, we're not full time. I think having that intermediary helps us in that process of becoming peers and us working together as equals in the space.
I agree, Ines, because also on that point about not being full time, it's where, sometimes life happens and capacity gets stretched. And so HUDL was able to bring that together. So still include our voices in different ways. If you can't attend a meeting, at least you can be sent a survey, you can send your thoughts in a document, and then that can be translated by either Keji or Flori in the kind of ongoing meetings, project meetings that they had with you, Catherine. And I think that we were involved in some of those, but particularly where capacity was stretched, because being a young person and trying to figure out university or, your first few jobs whilst also taking on a consultancy role can be really challenging. So I think that additional support to have almost like a moderator or somebody who can then also channel your voices through and your perspectives and the questions but keeps that consistency and has that historical knowledge of what's happened before. Because at many times, I remember when I started, some of the things that we were questioning, the first cohort had questioned. So it helped to have HUDL actually say, oh yeah, we have explored this. This is where this is. It just brought it all together.
Really, really good point. And if I could just add something about the kind of the structural thing about why it's been so great to work with HUDL Kedji. And it struck me as well when we've been doing exit interviews with IYP consultants as they've sort of left and moved on to other things. It's that way of having a bit of a kind of independence. I think it's HUDL's support to IYPC has meant that the collective is kind of like a little bit at arm's length from Esmée, which I think, because one of the things that I first thought about when we did the design work was this something that Esmée would bring in-house? And in some ways, and then what was kind of really interesting was when we did the values, and then IYPC made their own logo, kind of almost put that and did it as something separate from Esmée. And a lot of the consultants had talked about how it was quite helpful to be kind of almost a little bit at length from Esmée. Because I think in being able to provide, the challenge and tell us straight when we're getting it wrong, and keep us right. And also to feel that there is like a collective and support for kind of something that is sort of separate away from Esmée as an organisation. And I think HUDL being able to provide that and be kind of the intermediary has been really, really valuable.
Thank you. And Catherine, that kind of segues to the question I was going to ask, which is around like, why is it important to have, because we often call ourselves a critical friend. That's kind of how we frame HUDL. So I wanted to ask all of you, like, when we think about critical friend, what does that feel like? What does it look like in the mix of this partnership?
I think being a critical friend is about holding each other accountable. So it's not just a one-sided relationship. And certainly it wasn't with the IYPC. There are things that we needed to hold ourselves accountable and learn from. So having it be reciprocal, and the intention being wanting to involve young people in grant making and improve the decision making, but also improve opportunities. That was always the kind of shared common goal. So I think being a good critical friend, or at least having a good critical friend relationship, would need to be on that basis of having that goal commonality, but also the trust and the respect of, people's opinions not always agreeing with each other is completely normal. And I think it's in that conduct, in how you communicate particular ideas or maybe feedback that is opposing to what's being done or what's being proposed. I think we did that quite well in this relationship. And also the trust element made it okay to pivot. It was okay to change, like Catherine said. We all had an understanding that we're testing and learning in the process. So I think that was also an essential part.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely had tensions as a collective working with Esmée. But I think for us, it's just recognizing that there are certain spaces, and this is what Catherine was saying earlier, there are certain spaces within Esmée where we haven't been able to be there from the beginning, but that's okay. And I think it's just recognizing that some spaces are not built for us to engage in certain ways. So I think for us, it's a way of actually, we can still engage, but maybe differently. Maybe we need to be creative here. And so I guess for us as collective members, it's also a case of changing your expectations of how you want the work to be, and actually being adaptable to Esmée and what they're doing, and also that helps with the understanding of when you can push and when it's okay to actually accept that there are other ways of working here as well. I think another way, what's a challenge to being a critical friend maybe within Esmée is the fact that we only work with not intentionally, but we do work with a small number of grant funders in the space, of grant assessors, members of staff of Esmée. And that's not Esmée's fault at all. But I think that makes it difficult when we're trying to maybe challenge that strategic element of Esmée, when you only engage potentially with a third or a quarter of the organisation just because of capacity issues. So I think that's something to take forward in order to be a critical friend. You may not be able to engage with the fullness of an organization, but actually you will have those key champions where you have built that trust that Kimberly has said, where you have built those relationships. So that, I think, builds those foundations to be able to challenge in the future when you do get to be in those strategic spaces.
I think, Catherine, I want to come to you, but I know that when we were first kind of talking about this work and how we set things up, you were really keen for the collective to have that independence and to be outside so that I guess we could challenge and we could critique. So I guess for you, 5 years on, what does critical friend mean and what does it look like now?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting point, and just what Ines was saying there has really got me thinking. Yeah, it's not been easy, right? I mean, we have to be honest that it's not always easy. It's not always easy taking criticism, although we are inviting. The whole point of setting up IYPC was to invite criticism, but then it's quite hard not to be a bit defensive when people kind of say, "Oh, well, don't do it like this, do it like that." So I think that that's always work in progress. I think for all of us. And I think Esmée is, we are still very much in the footholds of learning about how to do co-design work well. I think the thing that we're always nervous about, I'm personally nervous about, and the thing that I feel that we're always needing to learn about is being really honest and transparent about what is on the table. What is it that we can change and what can't we? Or what can't we now? And I remember Keji having early conversations in the first co-design process where we talked a lot about like the car park. What are those things like we would love to do, but are just literally too far away from where we are now? How do we put them somewhere so we don't lose them, but kind of recognize that we can't do everything at once? And that there are some things that are kind of, I don't know, work in progress. I think we're getting maybe slightly better at this as we go, but I think I always sit with some kind of tension and discomfort of thinking, what if we can't honour IYPC's views? That was really what I had at the start, and now I feel maybe I'm a bit better about kind of saying, well, look, these are the things that we can change and we can work with. These are the things that we probably can't change now, but it's good to think about for the future. And just, I guess, being more transparent and that being more of a kind of a conversation. And I guess as we build trust and relationships about kind of saying, well, this perhaps isn't ideal, but structurally we can only do this or that. And it becomes more of a dialogue and a conversation. But yeah, I mean, I think this will always be tricky, right? And I really take the point about, in some ways, Esmée, perhaps it's, a coalition of willing, those colleagues who, are getting involved, really committed and believe in hearing different voices and challenge into an organization. And some people perhaps naturally do that more than others. Capacity is a massive issue, both for IYPC consultants and for Esmée colleagues. For any one of us, if you suddenly get super busy, then you know that maybe some of the deeper conversations and the deeper challenge, you just don't have the time for. So again, I think, communication, honesty, transparency, trusting relationships, I think these are the things that we always need to be working on. And so to not kind of shut down when sometimes it feels like, there's too much to change and that we can't change. There are a lot of things I think we would all love to change about philanthropy, and there are things that we can do today and things we can do next week and things that are a lifetime's work, and we just need to sort of put those in the right place and kind of stay motivated, keep working together, think about what we can move forwards on.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Catherine. I think now that I have left the IYPC and I can see the work that's being taken forward by others, I have comfort and, I guess, reassurance knowing that other young people with those similar values are upholding the values that we all agreed on, are carrying forward that work. So I almost had to be okay to say, actually, it's fine if I'm not going to sit under the tree of the seeds that I've sowed, because others are now carrying forward that work and you're passing on the baton. And I think it very much speaks to the fact that this work and what we do is an evolvement. It's not static. and where organizations can get it wrong, and where sometimes you can overpromise and underdeliver, is when there is a tight end to the start and finish of something, because then you find you're not able to complete everything. Like you say, sometimes it's resource, it's capacity, but sometimes it's also what's within your remit right now is your priorities. And it's okay to put things in the car park with the hope that you can continue that. But I think what it does take is a collective group of people willingly wanting to do that. And you might have more colleagues join in and see the benefits of what's happened before, and then they can kind of come in later on in the journey. That's also okay. You don't need everyone there at the very start line, because sometimes that can also cause a lot of confusion. Sometimes you need a small group to take it forward, and then it build iteratively as you go on that journey of changing the sector together.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I have a question. I'm going to open it up to everybody, but I'm going to first come to you, Catherine, because my notes say that. But how has this work changed you as a professional? Has it shifted how you hold power, make decisions, or see your role?
Absolutely. I've learned so much. I've learned so much from every single one of the IYPC I've worked with, and it's made me think a lot about kind of accountability and each of our own professional accountability. Like, you know, that we need to listen. We need to not be defensive. We need to recognize that we can always improve and do things better, and to carry that with us. And the IYPC values, you know, literally, like, I printed them off and stuck them on my desk. I mean, massive shout out to the OG IYPC consultants who worked on that. I remember the round table that Dan, who's now at Tudor Trust, held when we started collecting all the evidence for that. And then Betty and Thalia did an amazing job of pulling them together, and just having that, of, you know, something to kind of keep yourself right, hold yourself to account of, are we doing these things? So yeah, that's definitely changed me.
Amazing. Thank you. Kim, Ines, how's this space changed you professionally, if at all?
Well, it kind of gets me emotional, actually. I think this work has fundamentally changed my point of view when it comes to A, meaningful work, B, sort of an understanding of how to test and not being afraid to be that critical friend, and having those opinions, those big opinions that young people have. And actually, for me, the biggest change is just having the opportunity to be valued. That seems really insignificant, but it has informed all my future career decisions, because within this space, I have seen, along with HUDL, along with Esmée, what it feels like to have my voice influence change within an organization, to be respected, to have space, to have those sort of rough, honest conversations with colleagues. And so it's actually, well, it's made my life a bit difficult, because that's not replicated in so many other systems within the work environment. Trying to find a job after leaving university was really difficult, because I think the standard was so high in my head of how I should be treated and how I should be valued in this space. So I'm taking it as a positive because I think that's something that we should all have moving forward, especially in the social impact space, where there is such a tendency for kind of that, don't want to say exploitation, but definitely that kind of burnout culture, and just really being shown what it means to be valued within a space has been life-changing, really.
Yeah,
Yes.
I can completely relate to that as well. I think it's changed me both on a personal level, but also a professional one. And I think on a personal level, the level of confidence that I have now, it's not to say I didn't have confidence before, but confidence in myself as a professional, and to trust my opinion, and to put in the work, even sometimes when I'm tired. I think it really gave me a good structure in terms of the discipline of, okay, we need to meet this deadline, and I'm accountable to this group of people. And it allowed me to be better with managing my calendar. It's all those little things that can be really challenging, not just for young people, for adults too. But I found I've grown tremendously on a personal level. And then on a professional level, it's enabled me to be a better advocate for other young people. I'm so hot on the values, and I like to see young people be valued meaningfully. And so I'm able to be that voice in the room that can be a little bit awkward, and have a giraffe moment to say, should we be doing it like this?
Mm.
And I wouldn't have had the confidence to do that without the backing of where I've seen this work in the past. So I'm thankful to the IYPC experience for that. And also just the friends that I've made in the
I was
sector.
gonna say the people have been amazing.
The people have been incredible. And, sometimes it takes years and years to build a network, and we've been able to be afforded that opportunity. So I think just forever grateful to the experience and to Esmée Fairbairn and to HUDL as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I can't help but always feel like warm and fuzzy when I hear this stuff. And Catherine, I don't think you and I could have imagined like all of this when we spoke at the tail end of 2019 and then when everything got signed off in 2020, right? Like, I don't think we could have imagined it. So before we kind of exactly. So before we wrap up, I would like to ask you all to answer one question, which is, what's one thing from this journey, whether it's a moment, a value, or a relationship, that you'll carry forward into whatever you do next? I'm seeing thinking faces for our listeners, thinking faces and smiles.
I think for me, I'll bring in here the focus throughout my IYPC journey and as a collective. A big focus has been on joy and care. And Kim mentioned it at the start, really, how that actually became one of the criteria for our youth-led creativity fund, because we saw the value in bringing that joy and care. And I think for me, that's changed completely how I work, and really embedding well-being into projects from the beginning as well, and having that space to be able to have the confidence to know when it's too much, when you should pull back, when you should be transparent with your colleagues, but also what does joy and care look like? That's something that we've explored so much within the collective here. Yeah, it's been such an incredible experience to be able to embed that in our work.
And I think I'd follow on from that and say, I think a value that I've taken forward is that culture of learning. Because I think all the other values are equally important as this one. But I think learning in the sense of I'm so adaptable and I'm willing to understand different perspectives more now. I'm willing to also be challenged, even though I'm working as an expert, quotation marks, in the sector. I think nobody can really be a full-on expert on everything. But I think I've taken on that curiosity that I had before joining the IYPC, and it was really nurtured during the experience in that, asking questions, being curious, continuously wanting to learn. And I think that's really helped the projects that I've been able to impact now that I've left as well in the sector.
Amazing. Thank you. And Catherine, over to you.
Oh, I think joy and care is definitely a big one. That's become like quite a mantra now for us all. But I think as well, to listen, to really listen, not just kind of tokenistically listen and nod, but to listen and to act, and to always be prepared to have your opinions and things that you've held to challenged, and to just be open for that. That's definitely something IYPC have taught me.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for your honesty and for just sharing like your journey with the collective and with the partnership with Esmée Fairbairn. I'm going to pull us to a close now, and a huge thank you to today's guests for sharing their stories and insights. So thank you for joining us for this episode of HUDL Up, and a huge thank you to today's guests for sharing their stories and insights. If you'd like to learn more about HUDL, explore our work with the collective, or get in touch about involving young people in your program, strategy, or organisation, you'll find links in the description of this episode. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening now, and join us next time as we continue holding space for real stories, shared power, and collective change. See you next time.